And joining us today, Brian Ternus, AgriGold agronomist for Southern Minnesota and Eastern South Dakota. Brian, great to have you on the show today. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Jesse.
Well, I appreciate it. Let's jump right in. I want to talk about iron deficiency chlorosis, IDC. And this is something that soybean growers, especially across the northern plains, you talk the Red River Valley, parts of Minnesota and the Dakotas, really, they deal with this. It's a big concern for farmers in that region. But just for starters, talking IDC, can you give folks who may be listening wondering what exactly that is? Can you give us a little bit of a definition of what IDC is?
Yeah, so IDC is a inability of a plant, but here we're talking about soybeans, but the inability of the soybeans to, as in a seedling stage, to take up iron from the soil. The iron is usually still present, but there's a cause in the soil, such as high carbonates, high nitrate level, high saline level that will restricts the iron from being taken up by the soybean plant in its early growth stages. And then this causes a yellowing of the trifoliates, typically an intervanal yellowing. The midrib stays pretty green still, but the intervanals of the trifoliates will turn yellow.
Well, Brian, I know as I mentioned, IDC, this could be a regional issue and it could really have a significant impact on a soybean crop, can it?
Yeah, there are some areas, if you get significant enough IDC pressures along with a soybean variety that is less tolerant to that, you can lose the um, whole crop in areas of the field. Typically you get more of a patchy type disease in the field, so you won't lose it across the whole field, but you'll lose. It's definitely something where you can lose several bushels too, even if it does eventually grow through it.
Well, Brian, let's talk variety selection. I know that's something that's going to be key in trying to manage IDC, and I know that it's something that AgriGold, along with other folks, have been working on to try and find some of those varieties that can really help when it comes to IDC. So, talk about why variety selection is so important.
Well, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, that there's different varieties that seem to be a little more tolerant to the restriction of the iron or the IDC, the iron deficiency chlorosis symptoms, and they're able to tolerate those symptoms a little better. And so we're trying to, you know, flesh out which of those do better, and that way we're able to recommend those varieties to our growers. And so the more tolerance it has to that, the less yield damage or yield loss you'll see to the chlorosis symptoms.
hmm I would have to think management during the growing season as well, drainage, soil nitrates. I would have to think that's a big key as well in trying to manage iron deficiency chlorosis, isn't it?
Yeah, if the IDC is being caused by like saline soils and that, where the cause might be a high water level or wet soils, yeah, drainage will definitely help to alleviate those causes and those symptoms. Therefore, it can take a little bit. It's not an overnight fix for it, but if you put drainage out in the field, maybe tile drainage or something like that, then you'll definitely see an improvement eventually in the soils, and in turn your IDC symptoms. Some other management type practices are there's an iron chelate that you can put in furrow with the soybean that can help alleviate some of those symptoms. It provides iron in an available form for the seedling and help it grow past the stages where the IDC is in effect. It's not a cure-all, but it definitely helps to push it through those stages. And there's also a few. There's a cultural practice. Sometimes when you get higher, you can put them soybeans in higher populations. You get those soybean plants together. But the seedlings, what they're doing is exuding an acid into the soil that helps to neutralize or helps to break down the iron that's there. With a high pH soil, it neutralizes that acid. So if you get more seedlings into the soil in that one spot, it puts more acid out and helps it to overcome that a little bit better.
Well, I have to think as well, especially for growers in the northern plains that might deal with some of these issues. It all comes down to knowledge and knowing what to look for, what you could do if you run into issues with IDC, Brian. I would think.
Yeah, once it's growing, usually the unifoliate when it comes out will still be green because it's being still fed with the nutrition from the seed and the cotyledons. But once you start pushing out those trifoliates, is where you'll start seeing the symptoms for the IDC. Usually, when we're doing ratings, we wait till about V2, V3 stage. Seems to give us a pretty good feel on how it's going to respond to to the um, the reduction in iron in the plant and that. So
Mhm.
once it's out in the field, it's in growing. It's hard to really do too much with it. You might be able to try to spray some iron chelate over foliar to try to reduce some of the symptoms. But really, once you're out there and it's growing, you're waiting for it to just grow through the stages that that's being affected.
Well, Brian, great stuff on IDC. I should ask you before we run out of time how things are looking crop wise in your area there, eastern South Dakota, southern Minnesota. I know I think you're probably right in the heart of where that derecho came through here a few days back. How are things looking in your neck of the woods here as we get into the month of July?
Yeah, immediately around me, there's a really good stretch. I was driving down Interstate 90 to the east yesterday from Sioux Falls, and I was pretty good 20, 30, 40 mile stretch where there wasn't much corn standing up straight right now. I think most of that it didn't look like it was snapped or anything, so I think most of that will eventually come back upright again. But the wind definitely was. Uh, Affected what we had. They had reports of 80-mile-an-hour winds in Sioux Falls and that, so it wasn't too discriminate when it was blowing over, unless there was a little bit of a windbreak or something. Then you might have seen some still standing up, but for the most
Mhm.
part, the fields were leaning pretty hard. Soybeans seemed to come through pretty well though. The actual moisture we got was welcome. We were starting to get a little bit on the dry side before that, but so far as moisture, we're okay now. But yeah, we'll see how things respond to that wind that came through.
Yeah, hopefully that corn stands back up. And as you said, hopefully not a lot of damage was done. And of course, I'm sure, Brian, if folks have questions about any agronomic topic, reaching out to you or their local AgriGold agronomist would be a big key, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we can provide you with any information or help you need to make the decisions that you're looking at.
And I know as well, folks can go online and find their local agronomist as well. AgriGold.com is where they can find more information. With that, Brian Ternus with AgriGold. Appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us today on the American Ag Network.
Thank you so much.